11,
What's
yes.
basically our strategy?
I left my badge.
As I mentioned,
Ah, the magic extras.
where you leave your badge?
11.
Is
11.
this 11?
I was no.
Is the badge?
No.
And both of them from this row, not from this. Returning back, all unfortunately, also maybe not here. Maybe not here.
This was where it was.
You can go to reception and
I'll
take
do that.
new one.
I'll get a new one. Okay.
I'm so sorry. Yes?
Kartımı koydum, sonra qaytardım. Kart elə bildimə yapışdı, bir də açılmamışdı. Sürüşüb düşməyib buralara.
Burada kalmadı. Orada reception'a yakınlar. Belki o reception'a verir.
Kartı, mikrofonun kartını dünən aldım. Bura taxdım, eşiği açılmamışdı. Resepsiyona yaxınlaşdım, vermədilər.
Manası budur ki,
Bilirəm ki,
ancaq orada yazılır ki, onsuz qətiyyən verilmir. Yəni, məsələn, bir bunu ödəməlidir, bir də otaqdan çıxmalıdır.
Okay, ladies and does it work? So I need myself the. Hello? Hello? Okay. I think we have channel 3 here. Everything is running late, but ladies and gentlemen, let's start this session now on the Internet of Things. Welcome, and I'm very thankful that we have now a very excellent panel here of high-level experts. We have some last-minute changes and also substitutes. I have to apologize that Fiona Alexander from the US Department of Commerce is not able to come because she has left already today. We miss also Bob Khan because he could not travel to Azerbaijan, and we are still waiting for Hong. But anyhow, we have a very distinguished panel here. It starts with Latif, Mr. IP version 6 already since more than 10-15 years. Jeff Houston from APNIC, Megan Richards from the European Commission. Martin Boderman is a substitute. He was not mentioned in the program, but he has joined now this panel, and he is a board member of the PIR, the Public Internet Registry, and Rolf Weber from the University of Zurich, who is also a member of the EU Internet of Things Task Force. So we had we have Avri Doria. She has preferred to sit in the background, and she will give us a little bit introduction because she's also deeply involved in the was deeply involved into the one of the research projects of the European Commission on the EuroNF, the network of the future, where we had a special research project on the governance dimension of the Internet of Things. We did this workshop, a similar workshop, 1 year ago in Nairobi, and we decided that the subject, is still needs more clarification, needs more discussion. Internet of Things is a rather vague project, which is not yet really defined. What does it mean? It started in around 10 years ago when it became clear that there is an opportunity to link objects to the internet. And it was a combination of two different things. On the one hand, we know the barcode, which has a lot of information on a lot of objects, but the barcode was not yet linked to the internet. But with the emergence of RFID chips and then the allocation of IP addresses to objects, this changed the situation. And so around 7 or 8 years ago, some people said, okay, this is a new dimension of the internet, and they called it the Internet of Things, in contrast to the Internet of Computers or Internet of People. So, and since that, we try to find out, what really the Internet of Things is, whether it's only a new application, like you see other applications, search engines, social networks, or whatever comes out on top services, or whether this is really something new. The French government a couple of years ago had the idea that the ONS, the object naming numbering system, it looks rather similar like the DNS, the domain name system, and while we'll have a mechanism for the domain name system, so the idea was probably we need also something for the ONS, the object naming system. And we had a long discussion about whether we need one root or like in the DNS, or whether it should be a federated root or things like that. And the European Commission was very helpful in promoting research to get more knowledge about this, and the Commissioner Cruz created a task force 2 years ago, and to find out, what are the various dimensions. So certainly the business perspectives is a great opportunity, and you have a lot of other opportunities where you can introduce new services, new applications, which bring more opportunities and more choices to users and create new options for all kinds of small, medium-sized, and also big corporations. So it's a wonderful opportunity for the future. But it has also some implications, particularly for privacy, for security. And so the question was then also, is there a need for a special governance structure? And within the various projects of the European Commission, came out with 2 different approaches. One group said, yes, there is a need for IoT governance, and we have to create a new mechanism to govern the Internet of Things. The group was called Casacras, and just recently in a meeting in Venice in June this year, they proposed the establishment of a new international organization, or even an intergovernmental organization, for the management of the Internet of Things. And there was another research group where Afri and I was involved in the EuroNF, which said, no, the Internet of Things governance is just not different from the Internet governance we have. There is no need for a special mechanism. It's too premature. So it makes no sense to start with a governance mechanism when it's still unclear what the Internet of Things is indeed. And we have no exact definition. And we also argued that the privacy issue raised in the Internet of Things, which are serious issues, are not so fundamentally different from privacy issues in social networks and in search engines. And so that means we do not see that the Internet of Things is so different from the Internet that it needs a different mechanisms. And our conclusion was that the existing Internet governance ecosystem can accommodate all elements which are raised by the Internet of Things, and there is no need, at least at this stage, to move forward towards the establishment of a new mechanism or a new organization. So this is more or less where we are here today. So we have not yet a clear consensus, a clear understanding, what the Internet of Things is and what the governance dimension of an Internet of Things could be. And that's why I'm, want to turn this workshop more into a brainstorming, so that we will not present already fixed results, but we will discuss this from various issues. And I think all the people here on the podium have enough knowledge. And my understanding is that Megan Richards have to leave already in a couple of minutes. And so I would just ask her to start and to give us a little bit the background what the European Commission has done and what the plans are, because after the restructuring of the DG Connect now, the Internet of Things disappeared a little bit as a priority, and now cloud computing is more important. So it would be certainly of interest for the community here to understand what the midterm plans of the European Union are. Thank you, Megan.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and Wolfgang, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for promoting me as well. I see that I'm now Deputy Director General, which is, I was acting for quite a long time, most of this year, but I'm not actually the Deputy. But so let me just reassure those of you who have an interest in this. The Internet of Things is still very much, excuse me, something that we are very much interested in the European Commission, and we have a proposal to write a European Commission communication on the governance of the Internet of Things, which I think I spoke to you about at the last year's IGF to tell you a little bit about where we were and what was going on. We have an expert working group on the Internet of Things, which is divided into a number of subgroups looking at issues such as personal data, ethics, standardization, etc. And these are, of course, very important aspects to look at how the Internet of Things works, what are the implications, etc. It was never intended, and I think Wolfgang said quite clearly that this is the case, it was never intended to develop a new and separate or parallel Internet of Things governance group or structure. The question is that because of the nature of the interconnection of things and the interconnection between people and things, there are a certain number of issues, as I mentioned, personal data, standardization, ethics, etc., that should be looked at perhaps in a little bit more depth, and the particular aspects that are identified and attached to those issues. So that's what the expert group has been looking at, and it's been working for at least a year, perhaps a bit more now. Wolfgang probably remembers the exact dates. With the and I used to be responsible for the directorate that was looking after this expert group, and as I said, it's continuing to work with a view, as I said, to developing a communication of the European Commission on governance of the Internet of Things in the European context. With the reorganization of our Directorate General, and you don't want to know all the gory details of how, why, where, the Internet of Things continues to be a priority. We continue to work on the expert group. The problem that is perhaps perceived by some of you in terms of its prominence or its identity or the awareness of Internet of Things is perhaps because the activity on Internet of Things is now in the unit that is looking after Internet security. And that group of people has been very much occupied over the last few months, and particularly since the reorganization came into effect, which was 1st of July. That group has been very much occupied with developing a Commission communication on Internet security. And this is why perhaps some of you haven't seen so much activity or have perceived that there's not so much activity in Internet of Things, or that it doesn't seem to be as important. It continues to be important. We continue to do the work, but I think some of these other issues like the Internet security communication and of course the cloud computing strategy have been perceived as taking over perhaps a little bit of the work. That doesn't mean we have lost interest or we're not continuing to work as much as possible on it. But these other issues are certainly politically very active and perhaps taking a bit more interest. So that's where we are. The working group continues to, it's very active, and we had originally hoped that this communication on governance of the Internet of Things would be ready by the end of, well, I think our original planning was the first quarter of 2013. And that planning is still, and we had hoped that we might even be able to advance to the end of this year. But I think we keep still early 2013, let's put it that way. First half of 2013 is where we plan to have a communication.
Okay, thank you very much. This brings more light into the process. Professor Rolf Weber from the University of Zurich is a member of this task force. And so he's also in the subgroup for IoT governance. And probably, Rolf, you can a little bit summarize what has been done so far and what are your prospects for the future.
Well, thank you very much, Wolfgang. I appreciate, in fact, that Megan has given some kind of commitment to the work related to IoT, because as it has been said, the relatively large group who has met maybe 4 times a year was correctly split into, I think, 5 groups at the beginning, and afterwards even a 6th subgroup has been established on ethics, and the subgroups are looking at privacy, security, at standardization, as has been said, also at governance. And in fact, in early spring of this year, some kind of special questionnaire has been submitted to the public, and a couple of answers have been collected. However, probably as a member of this group, I should also say that in the recent past, we did not too much have the impression that we would be backed. So the last meeting has been cancelled, which was scheduled for September. The next meeting, scheduled for next week, has been shortened. And insofar, it might have been caused by a coincidence of incidents like the restructuring, like the emphasis on internet security, but nevertheless, and not to be understood as a critical mark, just as a perception on the side of the members of the working group somehow, the drive was not anymore as strong as it has been, and members of the group still do not know, for example, the final outcome of the responses to the questionnaire. And probably next week we are going to see how the various elements are to be taken up. As far as governance in particular is concerned, I think I should say, to be fair, that not a specific scheme of governance is envisaged to be proposed by the experts, as Wolfgang already mentioned at the very beginning. Probably the skepticism amongst the members of the expert group being involved in law, as myself, or political media science as Wolfgang, is at least not weak, to say it in reluctant terms, and we rather think that specific topics should be tackled, that privacy standards need to be strengthened, that of course standardization is very important, and I do not want somehow to monopolize now the discussion, but I think we should also look much closer at competition law, which has not yet been done. I think I leave it at that for the time being.
Thank you very much, and I think Rolf's statements reflects a little bit that we are still struggling with the basics, the understanding what is exactly the Internet of Things and what are the needed actions. And the postponement of the communication of the European Commission indicates also... Sorry? Okay, can you speak to the microphone?
Sorry, the communication has not been postponed. It was always foreseen for early 2013. That was always our target. I think first quarter of 2013. And as I said, it's still for early 2013. Whether it's still in the first quarter or closer to the second quarter, it's still early 2013. That was always our initial target. It was never planned for 2012. At one point, we had hoped that we might be able to advance it to make it in 2012, but that was never the official plan, not at all. And as I said, the only reason now that perhaps it seems that, and this is a perception, it's not the fact, that it seems perhaps it's perceived as being not the very top priority, is because the cyber security and internet security communication is taking so much time and so much effort, and the same people are working on these two aspects. So because the other one is urgent and has to be done right away, perhaps you haven't seen so much visibility.
Okay, this is very helpful. This clears a little bit the air. However, at least my understanding is that we still struggling with the basics. And last year in the workshop, when Fiona Alexander was here, we discovered that the US government and European Commission, have not the same approach to the understanding of the Internet of Things. And Jeff Houston was also in the workshop last year. And he also, from a perspective of the Asian Pacific IR, he argued that it's just a technical service and not, something which is so new and different. Jeff, probably you could reflect a little bit about how you see from Australia, from the Australian perspective, from the South perspective, these activities of the European Union.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Yes, I'm Jeff Houston. I work with the Asia Pacific Network Information Centre. I'm not a citizen of an EU country. I don't enjoy EU funding for any of the work I do. So I can look at this and express by bemusement that I find the entire thing somewhat strange. It seems to me that it's all backwards, that you invent a catchy phrase, Internet of Things, and then you try and discover that there's a problem statement and somehow invent one of those, and then work very hard to generate a solution for your so-called problem statement. It's all computers. It's always been computers. It always will be computers. Some of them are quite big with lots of buttons. I have one here. You probably have one too. Some have fewer buttons. Is there any difference between the two? Not really. What if I embed it all the way so that you never actually see that there's a computer inside there? Still a computer? Of course it is. Any difference? None whatsoever. Same stuff. Exactly the same set of protocols. Why do we use the same set of protocols? Because it's cheap. The protocol's openly available. I can ram it on the same chip. Done. So, to my mind, this is like saying that consumer electronics needs governance. That there are real deep and abiding issues about my refrigerator in terms of identity and privacy. That my washing machine somehow needs an EU regulation about how it should operate its on and off button. This is insane. It's just computers. And realistically, all we're trying to do is put forward decent infrastructure to actually allow them to do a little bit more than they currently do. So I do have this refrigerator, and it's kind of cool. It has a motor. It stores my perishable food. And that's really good, and I like its function. What if I whacked a computer in there? Well, it already has one, so what the hell? What if I put IP on there and did Wi-Fi? What could it do? Actually, it could do a lot. If I was in New York 2 weeks ago, and it knew that there was a storm coming and there was likely to be a power surge, and if it was really good, it would fill up a few tanks of water in its refrigerator and freeze them. So when the power went out, it'd still stay cool for up to 2 days. I would say, thank you, fridge. That's a really good service. And I would pay a little bit more. Not a lot, because it's just a fridge. But I'd do that. Does it need governance? I just do not understand where that comes from. Does it need an entirely different DNS? Why, for God's sake? The existing one doesn't work? Of course it does. If you look inside where the DNS is today, you'll find it in all kinds of devices already. And it will continue to go there because A, it's available, B, it's open source, and it's the cheapest way of doing it. Why go and reinvent the wheel every last bloody time? So, no, I find this entire exercise one that really strikes me as the application of bureaucracy to a non-problem. I do not understand why there's any need to actually separate out computers you can see from computers you can't see and somehow claim that this is an entirely separate universe that needs some kind of distinct governance mechanism. I'm sorry, but maybe it's just my Australian sense of perspective, but I just can't see it. Terribly sorry.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And Megan certainly, wants to reply immediately and clarify some of the issues, probably.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as I said, European Commission communication is foreseen. I never said anything about legislation. There is no intention whatsoever to legislate on Internet of Things. That's never been our intention. The issue that is identified are the issues that have been identified by the expert group is not a parallel universe, but how Internet of Things and communication, things to things and people to things, has implications for issues like standardization, like personal data protection, etc. It's not to develop or create an alternative universe or to do anything else. It's to look at the issue, identify where and what problems or issues might potentially be there, what needs to be looked at in particular in the European context in the future. It's not at all intended to regulate it or to legislate it or etc. It's a policy review and identification of issues. Let's put it that way. I think that's the best way of identifying the issue. And to come back to your intelligent fridge, I'm sure that you have a fridge that tells you that there's a storm coming, but my fridge would probably tell me stop eating so much chocolate and you're putting on weight and maybe you should think about having fewer carbohydrates in your diet or God knows what it might do. So your fridge is probably more friendly with you than mine might be. But the point is that I think there is an important consumer protection element in this as well. And so it's not really anything more dramatic or exotic than that. Perhaps the word governance is what makes people a bit concerned and upset. And I know that in the other workshop where I'm supposed to be in parallel, they're talking about governance of e-identity. And we say we shouldn't talk about governance of e-identity, we should talk about sharing and interchange, etc. So perhaps the word governance is an unfortunate word. I'm willing to accept that that's perhaps not everyone's cup of tea.
I think that's very wise. Words matter. But, what we have identified as issues, not probably for governance, is I think there are privacy issues involved. But you said data protection. For instance, we identified the critical moment is the object meets the subject, the individual, and then you have a new dimension for tracking and tracing. So that means if you buy shoes and there's an RFID chip, and the RFID chip is not disabled when you pay for the shoe with your credit card, then somebody who has access to the data can follow where your shoes are. And so this raises some concerns, among individuals, and you have to look for some safeguards. So not if you are not the expert in privacy, but you are, the man who says, okay, with this IP version 6 world, we can do even more and more and more things. How you relate from your perspectives and experience from the last 10 years, this debate to the future.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Well, the experience is not only from the last 10 years, but from the last 30 years. When we don't know the experience that we have, or we have not understood the lessons that we learned from the first internet, so V4, most probably we'll repeat the same mistakes with the new one too. In the past, we had just networks, and IP came as an open standard and glued them, and we have got the internet. In the Internet of Things, we don't really yet have an Internet of Things. We have networks of things. If you look at the man who defined the word Internet of Things is Kevin Ashton in his work that he did at MIT back in 1998, where he worked on the EPC protocol and coined the Internet of Things, although nothing was connected to the Internet. At least he had the vision that it should become one of those days to be part of the internet. But as soon as it becomes part of the internet, then basically anything that we do today with the internet applies to these things as well. Yeah, I agree with Jeff, although not in those harsh terms, because I know he puts things so bluntly. So the lessons that we have learned from V4, we'll have to apply them to V6 as well as to Internet of Things. And it's a huge educational process that we have to go through. If it is very obvious to Jeff, it's not obvious to the rest of the world. So we have something which is quite important is we have seen reluctance of most of these RFID and ZigBee and so on to be reluctant to move to IP. It's only recently that they started to adopt IP. And IPv6 was even harder for them to accept, because they tell you, well, I need customers. They are not yet on IPv6, so they see it from an immediate adoption perspective. Now, the Etsy has started a new initiative called One M2M, so that will create a kind of 3GPP-like standardization effort, at least to get the Asians to work together with Europe and the US in a similar fashion, because the fragmentation in Internet of Things is quite huge. China will have its own Internet of Things protocols, and you will have to adopt them as well if you want to be in their markets. In China, you have EcoNet, which is totally different from what we are doing in our place. And Internet of Things is nothing new. We have multiple proprietary solutions today that exist. So one of the things we need to do is how to make it easy for them to keep their legacy solutions today, and then show them a smooth transition to IP. And in the research, we have to look at the next Internet of Things, which is how it can be IP directly connected, because this is what Jeff said, I can do a lot more with it than if it is just kind of intranet of things. This is what we have today. So they are not totally connected. I still have the option to make it available or reachable by anybody. And still, I would like to have my privacy and so on. And I think these are the issues that need to be addressed. And the solutions we have in the market so far are rather mediocre, if not that much promoting the Internet of Things as it should be. In terms of DNS, I agree. We've got DNS, it's working. Anything which is open source is the best thing that can happen to us. But Bob Kahn had created what is called the handle system. And the handle system has something that DNS doesn't have, which is authentication and a better mobile authentication. So if the device moves around, you can still find it. And the price is almost zero. So for billions of devices that are coming on board, I think we should maybe add to DNS something like the handle system, which is now used in most of the big libraries where you can find the books and the kind of stuff. Obviously, the DNS world is not going to like it because it's going to take away the money from their pockets. But most probably for the research world, it's a good thing to look into. That will change a little bit. I think the security and privacy in that area could maybe enhance it, because DNS is still needs to be fixed because it's not fully secure as such. Most probably too expensive for want to give DNS to each device as such. So this is an area where I think we should do a bit of research.
Okay, Martin, you are a consultant in the Netherlands, but you're also on the board of the Public Internet Registry, the .org. And, while in the discussion there was, okay, if we, at the moment, everything is happening on top of a .com domain with CPC Global, TS1. Massimiliano, unfortunately, could also not come because he's busy in Brussels. When we had a number of initiatives, a lot of these registries were planning to do something, but then they realized there is no market for it. So that means the only CCTLD which achieved this was from France.fr. They offer the services, but nobody uses it. I think .org also appear that no, we have no interest. But at the same time, you are a consultant. That means how is your perspective of this from the practical point of view of a GTLD registry and from your practical experience as a consultant about this situation where we are now?
Okay, thank you, Wolfgang. First, I am on the board of the Public Interest Registry, but that is not, there's not a position of the Public Interest Registry on this. We are concerned with DNS, basically, and we're here to serve. From a perspective of the overall picture, I see that the internet as we know it today is not the same as it's going to be in a couple of years from now, and there's a couple of major drivers to that. And social networks are clearly the impact of search engines and how they develop is clearly one. And as I see it, the fact that things are going to communicate with us, and I believe increasingly so, also in connection to the internet, will greatly influence how the internet will develop.
data will become accessible in some ways, and that allows services to become available that were never possible before. And I think it's important that we realize that. And even today, there's a lot of talk, Internet of Things, yes or no. Things are going to communicate with us. Things are going to provide data on the internet, whether we want it or not. And we'd better think about how this works in our infrastructures. We have governance structures, and these governance structures evolve as the internet changes and should continue to do so. Today we're very much involved with talking in the ICANN circles about how government finds its place where it hasn't had really stepped up before. That's one of the changes. That's because it affects society. Well, the future changes like social internet, like objects on the internet will affect that as well. So that's going to happen. Who's going to provide addresses for that? I don't think they need a domain name or something, but they will need to have a unique identifier. So much is clear. I would just plead to next to what we do, go and spend some real time in realizing what it means that objects are becoming part of our ecosystem. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, yes, privacy issues, there's a lot to be said about it. Some people say as soon as there's a privacy issue, stop everything, drop it, don't use those data, or protect it or prevent that. I think that's too simple. I do think masses of data, more and more, will become available via the internet. And I do think society can benefit from that. It does mean, however, that on privacy issues we start to get a different debate. We start to make people aware of what becomes possible and how these things evolve. And there I can see that the sooner we get clear on where we would be happy for that future to go as a human population, the sooner we can make sure that the architecture reflects that and built in possibility to deal with that is there, allowing us to benefit as much as possible from the blessing that availability of all those new data brings, and making sure we are aware of the dangers that brings and build in appropriate mechanisms to prevent abuse from this thing that's going to happen. More and more data are becoming available on the internet.
Okay, thank you, Martin. May I also now invite the audience, to ask questions or to make statements. And, I would like to start with Avri because he was an observer in this process and an actor for many, many years. And we need a microphone for her. And could you also probably reflect a little bit, although you cannot hear me, okay?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and thank you for not having me sit up on the panel, or not making me sit up on the panel. I actually have a advantage similar to Jeff's, but sort of the opposite, in that I've managed never to get paid by the US or the EU to think about the Internet of Things. Ever since I encountered the Internet of Things, I always was, oh, I like that, just, yeah. Ever since I encountered the Internet of Things, I have always been totally upset about the name of it, because I think the name of it has misled us into thinking that it should be something other than the Internet, that it should be something other than another overlay of an application over the Internet. But when we look at it that way, we actually see that we've got a couple problems in that, as I think it was Latif was saying, various people have used different address mechanisms. They've started out in different ways. They've formed themselves in different ways. We've seen that the scope of authority that people apply over these separate networks varies and bridges the various networks. So we build, but by calling it an Internet of Things, we've sort of taken it away from problems that we have in the Internet with other applications. And so I do think that there are complexities. I think that these complexities would actually help us if they were mainstreamed, as it were, into the actual internet discussions on complexity, internet discussions on scaling factors of you know, the users, the instruments that have addresses, on problems with scope of authority. Being both, I mean, being largely American and spending a lot of time being funded by other work in Europe, I've sort of taken two perspectives, although I've been admonished that there isn't a European perspective on Internet of Things. Whenever I tried to say, oh, I was going to work for a while on trying to figure out how to compare the perspectives between the US and Europe on Internet of Things, I would get there is no European perspective on your Internet of Things from various people. And so, but the fact is, one group looks at it as this is another overlay over the network, and until we find something that makes it different, then it really is just a problem that we should look at. We should look at it as privacy with perhaps a larger scope. We should look at it as addressing and how we deal with multiple addressing formats. We should look at it as authority scopes when they cross other boundaries. So how do we deal with that transnational? How do we deal with the privacy? How do we deal with that? But it seems to me very important that we actually keep it as just one more aspect of the problems we're dealing with in the internet generally. Now, if people in the Internet of Things go and say, you know, V4, not enough addresses for us and we can't use it. V6, who knows when that's going to happen? You know, another 20 years perhaps before V6 is globally usable, so we can't really solve it there. If we have people that are saying, listen, we already came up with our own addressing, you know, Internet of Things had its own addressing before V6 was created, before whatever, we want to keep using it, then it does bring up an interesting problem of interneting the V4 network, the V6 network, which is already something that we do, and whatever network they're using. Now, that's a problem that's been with us in the internet since the early days of the internet, when we would have various protocols and we would find ways to connect those networks to each other to make things work, to allow things to cross various borders. So I think it's an interesting topic, but the more we try to put it in a box called Internet of Things, the more we confuse ourselves. The more we sort of, and in this I guess I almost agree with Jeff, though not with his panache, but I do agree with the fact that, you know, it is bemusing on calling it something different, calling it something special, as opposed to just another aspect of the complexity of the network that is evolving. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Avery. And my understanding from what Megan has said with the plan to have a communication is that the communication should contribute to clarification. And it's like raising awareness that we understand the issue a little bit better. But, you know, I would ask Jeff, you know, what he thinks about Bob Kahn's handle system and the plan now to have this DONA, this digital object numbering authority. You know, is this the right reaction to this? And, you know, and how this is related? A lot have said, okay, this will take away something from the DNS, you know. How far this will go. Unfortunately, Bob is not here, so he cannot tell us about it. And I want to thank Megan for coming to us, and, you know, hope to see you next year again on the IoT workshop here in the IGF in Indonesia. Megan, thank you very much. Jeff, what is your comment on Bob Kahn's handle system and the DONA?
The DNS, despite all appearances to the contrary, has been truly prodigious. It generates billions of dollars a year to all kinds of folk who actually have no idea how the system works or what they use it for. Most of the money inside the domain name registration system goes to names that have no actual functionality on the net. They're just ghosts. The DNS is truly prodigious. Huge amount of money. So what do you do if you want money? Well, one way is you could go and invent an entirely new family of application for the DNS. And then you'd have a captive market for a whole bunch of new domain names. So one could argue that the enum exercise in telephony had nothing to do with telephony, had nothing to do with any kind of bypass mechanism. It was simply trying to sell 9 billion new domain names. And at $1 per registration per year, that's a lot of money. And one could argue that IDNs, in a similarly very, very cynical view, is just another way of generating hundreds of billions of new domain names. So it was all just about making money. And one could argue that the Internet of Things was an attempt to try and create a captive market for a new part of the DNS, corral folk in for $1 per name. And there are so many things and they all need a new name. So one way of doing things is to corral things into the DNS and capture an entire new market and get $1 per domain name per year, because the DNS is truly prodigious. Or you can go and invent your own DNS. Looks like the DNS, smells like the DNS, but you don't have to pay ICANN. And in some ways, the DNS is able to do anything. If you include NAPTers and SNAPTers, you actually have a complete regular expression language. You can do everything that handles do. You can actually do relocation. You can actually do, what did Latif say? Authentication and replication in the DNS. Authentication, you can do DNSSEC. And there's a huge amount of DNSSEC out there already. It's around 2% of resolvers and it's growing every day. So the DNS is truly capable, but sometimes folk just simply want to go off to one side and create their own prodigious field. And handles is one of it. Yeah, you could do handles in the DNS if you wanted to. Or you can go and invent your own name system. But every time we have tried to do a new identity system, and God knows we've tried about 20 times over the last 2 decades, because every time there's new technology, we need a new identification system. You think about its properties and you work through it again and again and again. And ultimately, every single identity system looks a lot like the DNS in the end. And you start asking yourself, why don't we just put it in the DNS? So almost everything we've been able to do lately, oddly enough, has been put in the DNS. And the last and not least has been the effort of Dane in the working group at the IETF, which is now putting domain name certificates into the DNS. So this whole massive business of certifying your domain name is now coming to a sunset. And it's now possible to simply self-sign into the DNS and rely on DNSSEC and security in the DNS to do all that. So I'm relatively cynical that handles offer any new semantics that isn't already encompassed in the semantics of the DNS. The DNS is truly prodigious. The DNS also works, which is pretty amazing. And the DNS is almost everywhere. And we're now seeing devices in the DNS. A few weeks ago, the IANA reported that the loads of the root key, the root of all the DNS, had jumped from 4,000 a month to September, where it reached 353 million in 1 month. What could possibly have caused 353 downloads of the root key of the DNS in September? Started on September the 19th. All the fetches were signed by Apple, and it was the time iOS 6 came out. So now we're seeing hundreds of millions of devices with their own DNS, with their own security, that are now autonomous from their environment. Welcome to the Internet of Things. It's the Internet we're in now. I don't understand the distinction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Latif, certainly I expected that you want to say something.
No, I mean, the only difference is about money. The handle system will cost per country $50 a year, period. You've got billions and billions of DNSs. So that's the difference. And it depends who's going to promote it. It's a question of marketing. Does Bob Kahn, and I hope he's going to maybe at least send us a message about what he wants to do with DONA, which is co-promoted by the ITU, which will create another issue for sure. But the ITU is not involved directly. But I think it's I would expect for developing countries and so on. This could help in the education sector, in the libraries, in the governments, so not to be a prey to DNS outfits. I think it's a very good thing. We have it running. It's running with V4 and V6, so it could. I mean, it's not the ultimate solution, but I think it can do the work the same way like DNS is doing it. So. But as Jeff said, we had 20 of them in the past, and the only one that made it is DNS, because to a certain extent it's open standard. Open standard is something that nobody can fight. You can resist for a decade, but at the end, open standards win. So this is most probably the question is how open the handle system is going to be, and then how the trust mechanism per country, who is going to delegate the trust in each country. And I doubt that the government should be the trust entity for the trust, because you have to double secure the keys between them. That could take a bit of time to deploy. So most probably deployment is going to be a factor of either success or failure.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there more questions from the audience? Please, can you introduce also yourself? Is there a microphone here for the gentleman on the second row? Thank you. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is. Am I
Yeah,
audible?
Yeah.
My name is Ian Fish. I'm here on behalf of BCS, the Chartered Institute of IT from UK. After last year's IGF, I went away and thought to myself, why is there nothing in BCS dealing with the Internet of Things, as it's such a big coming thing? So I set up a working group in BCS, which is an institute in the UK, and we've discussed all sorts of things in the last year. We never discussed governance for the reasons that have been described this morning, because we saw it as an integral part of the development of governance on the Internet as a whole. But one of the things that did come up, and I'd like the panel's view on it if it's possible, it was that there's statistics that show that the vast majority probably, of interactions of the Internet of Things when it comes into full operation, and it's not just an Internet of Things as has been described at the moment, will actually be machine to machine. And it seemed to us that in some ways that might affect some of the big issues that you were talking about earlier on. I just wondered if you had any views on that.
Somebody wants to, Martin?
No, exactly. This is one of the things that we don't get to talk about, because we usually limit ourselves to governance and privacy. And it's these elements that will affect also the work of the ITF and other bodies that have to do with the development of the Internet. It means thinking ahead of where we're going. And it's so obvious that it's going to happen. And as you said, whereas even maybe the vast majority will be communication between things, it still means that it has requirements for how the Internet is set up, the load balancing and whatsoever. So let's start recognizing that. Let's start to look, okay, in the governance field, in governments, what they need to do with this new world that is emerging, but also in ITF, IB, and other standardization and industrial development platforms, how it's going to happen. I don't think government is going to develop the future Internet. I think we're going to continue to do that bottom up, because it's so obvious it's the best way, whatever other people say. And we need to think of all these aspects, and then it's very useful to just accept the fact that this is going to happen, and then from that point start checking in your own domains what your role is in there and how you can contribute to that. So I very much agree with you with that.
Okay, Jeff.
You have a laptop. It's there open in front of you. How many processes are running right now? About 250. How many did you start? You're not using it, so you probably started none. Almost all of those processes are machine to machine. You have no knowledge about what they're doing. If you watch your machine boot, it's truly wonderful if you look at the packets. Because all of a sudden you're talking to the DNS, you're bringing in all the peripherals. A whole bunch of things are phoning home, pulling down new updates and configs. machine to machine is already what we do. It's exactly why we actually managed to make these rich environments where what you see on the screen is actually the amalgam of a massive amount of machine to machine communication. There's no difference between that and my iPhone, and between that and what is probably embedded in this somewhere if it ever actually got a clue and did Wi-Fi. So trying to create some artificial distinction between a device that doesn't have a screen and keyboard and one that does, or a device that for some reason there's no human nearby all of the time, is distinct from I occasionally look at my laptop, but I must admit the amount of things it does in response to me versus the amount of stuff it does because it's just sitting here, there's a lot more that it does because the power is on. So this is already a machine. It's a thing. And it's thing-to-thing communication like crazy. So I find it hard to actually think that the future at that level is any different to what we hear now. It's the same stuff. And that's why it's so inevitable sooner or later that instead of having a keyboard and a screen, you cut down on the buttons, reduce the form factor, and you go, well, this one isn't actually designed for humans to really use. It's just plug and play. I'll just embed it down here. How many computers are in your car? At least 10, probably 20 now. And it'll probably be 100 in a year's time. So, live with it. It's just here. It's nothing special. And your machinery, everything we're already doing right now is full of machine-to-machine communication. It's just what these chips do naturally.
I would like to add to this, if you don't mind. This is where we have different standardization bodies, and they invent new names for things that already exist. So machine-to-machine, invented by ETSI, although that's what the ITF has done for a long time. But ETSI doesn't do internet protocols. That's left to the ITF. So all of a sudden you have this kind of unusual things that are created and invented. And even, as I mentioned, there is one M2M initiative, which is basically already what we have. So it's beyond what Jeff is saying is the autonomicity of computing, which is wonderful. These things just work. So it's like the routing around the world. It just functions. Nobody has to push a button to see whether the packet has gone from A to Z, from Japan to... It's autonomic. And this is the beauty of the entire internet as such, to enable these things. About the future internet mentioned, that's not a misnomer we have. We have the internet. What's the future internet? This is just like saying that the internet we have now is not working, so let's create something new. It's nonsense. Future internet, if you take out the word internet and say future network, I would agree. Yeah, that's something new. But future internet, what could that be if it's not the internet that we have now? It's just bigger, just maybe faster. No more than that, but still it's the internet.
Thank you. By the way, I remember a meeting of the European Commission on the Internet of Things in Prague, where the main session discussed the internet is broken. So, and we are 4 or 5 years later, and we see it still works and evolves. So, you wanted to react to the comments. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to come back to Jeff. I don't actually disagree with him, but I just wanted to explain the context in which my remarks came. And it's actually that these aren't really internet problems. They're actually functionality problems. And where it came from was because one of the major drivers of our thinking in our working group were around issues like privacy and ethics. And we foresaw that when functionality increased with lots of I'm sorry I used the word machine to machine. I realize it causes, it's just a way of describing it. But when functionality increases, and a lot of it is done machine to machine, in things like e-care and e-health and things like that, you start to get ethical and privacy issues thrown up which weren't there before. So it's really a functionality-driven thing, which happens to be underlaid by the internet, by all these devices going onto the internet. That's how we saw it.
I'm also concerned partly about the so-called side effects of this machine-to-machine communication. So that means always sometimes you are crazy if you have your computer, you open it and you start a program, and then the computer does what the computer wants and not what you want. So and then you feel partly occupied by the computer. That means you are not the master of the machine anymore. So the machine masters you. And insofar, this is certainly
should run a scanner,
Yeah. So this is certainly, and I'm thankful that you introduced the ethical dimension in it. So that's a question, what is the relationship in a machine-to-machine communicated world of the individual? Is he just, becomes he integrated into machine-machine communication, or remains he the master of the processes and the machines work for him, or do they develop their own life? So I think this is partly a philosophical question, and also a very real question, because it's in the design. So that means the software and all these protocols are made by men, and so that means they should be aware about the implications and the probably intended and non-intended side effects. So
I think we did not answer correctly his question. Basically, what he meant is that, so if I make it an internet-enabled sensor or whatever machine and so on, and it talks to another one using an IP protocol, then yes, then in this case, this is what you want to say. Because currently we have just proprietary solutions that are running, and you want to make them internet-enabled. This is where maybe machine-to-machine should be explained. In this case, you will stick an IP address, private or public, whatever you want. We have, for instance, Linz AG, the town, and it has a smart city project, massive one, and they have 60,000 power meters, and they give them global IPv4 addresses. You're gonna chuckle. And that's the way they want it, because they want everyone to access these devices. Obviously, they found out that the customers at the beginning, they were looking at their iPhones to see the power that they consume and so on. But after 1 week, nobody was interested anymore. So there is a bit of a cultural thing to move into that direction. And they still say, well, we've got enough V4 addresses. We don't need to have V6, which is another nightmare we have in front of us. So.
May I ask the law professor here? In this machine-to-machine communication world, is there still a role for law, or is this just let it go? It's only protocols, and I would not say that it's the end of the law, but what is the role and function of law and public law in this coming world?
Well, as a law professor, I think I need to defend law. Otherwise, I would become unemployed, which would perhaps not be too much of a tragedy, because I would have many other ideas for the rest of my life. But I think I would like to step back a little bit, and you most likely heard from my first intervention that I'm not the promoter of a narrow network of legal rules. But when listening to Geoff, and maybe also a little bit exaggerating, I got the impression that some engineers are of the opinion that law is not needed at all. And if this would be the statement, then I would in fact object. And I'm really glad that you mentioned e-health, because as soon as we come into the field of e-health, then even if it is a machine-to-machine communication, and even if at first instance a person does not seem to be involved, we might be confronted with privacy problems, and then we do have a legal issue. Furthermore, at the end of my first intervention, I very shortly mentioned that we might run into a problem with a competition law. Should it be the case that terms of service of a market dominant infrastructure provider are to be accepted without any discussion, without any negotiation? isn't it in the public interest that we do have some kind an equal allocation of rights and obligations? And to perhaps be a little bit sarcastic, would it be a good idea that Geoff gets a very intelligent refrigerator, but I get a really thumb refrigerator, not knowing anything? I mean, I know that this example doesn't work, but in fact, we also do have something like justice, like equity. And if we look at these issues, then I think even if I would withdraw from a narrow network of legislation, we need to have some basic principles of law applied even after my retirement.
Jeff, could you accept this?
Well, so far what we've had is a system where the area of telecommunications inherited, I think, its legal perspectives actually from the older world of messaging and postal services. And we developed this rich surroundings of that service with an ethos called a common carrier. That the carrier is not liable for what they carry. The individual sender and recipient are liable for that material, and the carrier can move those goods without fear.
But sorry if I may intervene for a second. The carrier is liable to do the transport. The carrier is
liable
not
only to do the transport and not for the content.
So
now we see in this new world a whole bunch of folk trying to pull that apart, and the intellectual property people are basically saying the carrier is responsible for everything as long as it concerns our content, which is, I find, just incredible. But as well as that, we actually find that what's on websites and what's in applications aren't covered because it's not the transmission. I heard a presentation from a US Trade Commissioner about the behavior of the management of your data on a website. And if I understood her correctly, it wasn't a privacy issue. It was whether the website accurately described what it was going to do with your data. And if they said, look, we're going to sell it to the highest bidder and we couldn't give a stuff about your privacy, if they did that, that's okay, because they weren't lying. If they said anything else, we deeply respect your privacy and would never sell your data, and then went and sell it, that's bad. So we actually don't have a legal framework, as far as I can see, that actually puts the same respect for personal data inside other areas where data is collected and aggregated. Book readers, all that stuff coming from Kindle and Barnes and Noble and so on. You buy the books, but they look at you reading them. They know every page you actually spent time on. They know how long you spent reading your page. And in what they call the data exhaust, when you phone home back to the bookshop, your reading habits are sent back to them. That's in another country. That's under an entirely different regime. If it happens to be in the US, it comes under the terms of the Patriot Act. All your data belongs to the US government. But you're a citizen of the EU or a citizen of Australia. What's going on? Let's say I buy this refrigerator and it starts to have little hidden cameras snooping on my house. Who's the problem? The network service provider that provided the Wi-Fi that let the data through? Or is it the refrigerator manufacturer somewhere deep in China or in Korea? Or the application designer that sat somewhere in Taiwan? Or the fridge product manager that was somewhere in Germany? Who knows? So we find in this rather complicated world that yes, we would actually like some protection for individuals, but we have no way of knowing how to apply it. So the best we do is this rather strange system where everyone's meant to say up front what they do, and if you're lying, that's terribly bad. But as long as you're honest about the fact we're going to sell your data to the highest bidder, that's okay. You all use credit cards. They sell their data to the highest bidder. You all use airline frequent flyer points. They sell your data to the highest bidder. So I kind of wonder at this point exactly who cares about this stuff. I'd actually like more protection, and I find the whole legal process lagging about 50 years behind reality. Sad but true.
Do you have an answer to this? To do yourself? You asked good questions, but you did not answer it.
I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
Well, I can only say very shortly, of course, legislation is lagging back, but at least in certain instances, privacy laws are now applicable. We do have a major problem that the level of protection is quite different in the different countries, but social networks have been involved in privacy litigations more and more in the recent years. We gain now experiences with such kind of proceedings. Google and Facebook had to at least adapt their policies to a certain extent. Again, the development is very slow, but I would not say that the whole efforts are helpless. And as you certainly heard, I have not mentioned as an example copyright. That's a completely different picture, and as soon as we are talking about copyright and patent rights, we are of course looking at property rules and other very difficult questions which need to be reflected from fresh in a virtual world.
Okay, are there more questions from the audience so that we move now to the end of the workshop? I see David Cross in the room now. And we missed Fiona Alexander here, and we had no person from the U.S. government or close to the U.S. government, because we discovered that there is a different approach between the European Commission and the US government to the issue of the Internet of Things. And I don't know whether you feel to be in a position to say some words, how in the United States the issue of the Internet of Things is seen and treated. Is it a special issue or it's part of the broader discussion? Could you say some words or... Okay, thank you. No need for it. Martin.
Just want to bring one thing back, and that is that the Internet, as it's been developing, and the Internet of Things, however you feel about that name, how much more sensors and things are coming on the Internet. It's all been blossoming up in different areas of the world, and there may be more value in us as society, and it may emerge, and we may be able to help that by talking about it, by aligning that more, by making sure that if fridges talk, they talk the same language, so we can listen if we want to, and applications like that can develop in a way that identifiers are consciously there either for the lifetime of a product or just for a phase. Just for a phase if it's if you don't want it to be there for a lifetime, and sometimes it may be better to have it for a lifetime there in the right context. So it's these kind of opportunities that arise from technology to society that I would like to benefit from in the best possible way. And that means we need to discuss those as well.
Martin, thank you very much. You have more or less already started the final round and the final reflection. So if you want to have some final comments and what we should do now in the year ahead, should there be a continuation of the discussion? Should we just say, okay, we close the books about this issue? What would be your recommendation, your advice, what also the Dynamic Coalition could do in the next year if we decide to continue with the Dynamic Coalition? Latif.
Yeah, I think this is a very important initiative, as it's primarily an educational exercise to explain how the Internet functions and how the Internet of Things is going to function, especially to the non-technical lawyers and commission officers and what have you. It's very important for them to understand how this thing functions, because we don't have yet lawyers that have studied the Internet. They cannot really fix these things. So we'll have to wait for another generation or two until the guys, they have, Internet protocols as part of next to the other languages, French and English and so on. So they'll be able to be educated right from the beginning, and they will be quite accustomed to that language. And then we'll have most probably talented lawyers that will be addressing these issues. So in terms of educational exercise, it's very important to continue this work.
Thank you, Latif. Jeff, final word.
Not only is the DNS prodigious, but Moore's law is even more prodigious. We can double the number of gates we can put on a chip about every 18 months. We've been doing so for, about 3 decades. Computers will become smaller and more powerful and cheaper. All of those things will happen, and the rate is doubling. So we currently wander around with dedicated devices that are communicating devices that store notes, and we think that somehow things are different. In a year's time, this stuff shrinks yet again, that the iPhone becomes smaller and lighter, that you actually find embedding becomes everything, because the internet will no longer be a bunch of specialized devices for people. It's just in the things you use today. So I don't think it's anything special. It's just where we're going, driven by this sort of need to sort of get smaller and more powerful computing that the industry wants to do, driven by a need to sell at least 10 billion new processors next year. Then our environment keeps on changing, and the devices we use become more and more aware of our needs, because quite frankly we're moving from a command-led economy to a consumer-led economy. Whatever sells, sells. And quite frankly, those devices that become more helpful, understand where they are, understand the language they should use to interact with you, are all about being helpful. We've also found from Google that knowledge about you as a consumer is worth a massive amount of money. So these devices will look at you just as much as you look at them. And they will beam information back home. That's just fine, because quite frankly, that's how you pay for them. So yes, I think the world is changing very rapidly, but I don't think the Internet of Things is any different from the rest of this large-scale computing environment. And it's not the Internet, it's the apps and machines we connect into it. It's always been apps and machines. The Internet was just a really dumb, minimalistic protocol that glued them all together. The Internet was never the destination, it was just the means to get to any destination you wanted to get to. So no, I wouldn't make any distinction whatsoever. This is just all about us.
Thank you, Jeff. And this could be the very last word, because, you know, who can add something? Martin had already the final word, but the final word should go to the lawyer, because he was challenged by Latif and say, we have to wait until we have a new generation of lawyers which understand it and then will help us to fix some of the ethical and political and social problems.
Well,
do you see this new generation coming?
Perhaps surprisingly, I agree with Latif in this sense, and I wanted to say as a final word, we need closer cooperation between engineers, technicians on the one hand, lawyers, economists, social scientists on the other hand, and in fact this generation of lawyers has grown up without the internet. I would just say in brackets, unfortunately, the term Internet of Things has been invented by an engineer and not by a lawyer, bracket closed. So I think it is really very important that the exchange of knowledge, exchange of information between the technical people and the social scientists people is improving, and somehow black box legislation of lawyers who think that they have found something in a small room will certainly not survive. I would assume that the newer, younger generation might know more about the internet, but again, the education is still different. In most countries, it's very different. Whether you are going to a technical university or a social scientist university does make a huge difference, and therefore I do not think that university education or other kind of education as such is good enough. It remains to be an objective that the people in charge work together, as we try to do here on the panel.
Thank you very much. You know, I thank all the panelists here, and the thank goes also to the speakers from the floor, and give the speakers an applause. And I close this session, and we will just, you know, immediately go now to the meeting of the Dynamic Coalition, and, you know, people who are interested to, to know more about what the Dynamic Coalition is and have an interest, probably to continue with its work, should remain in the room. I think the meeting will be very short, not longer than 15 minutes. But, although for bureaucratical reasons, we have to have this meeting and we have to make at least, one decision, whether the dynamic collision should continue or whether we should close this and say, okay, we have discussed this issue for a couple of years and now we end it. So that's why people who have an interest in the subject could stay in the room. We make just a 3-4 minutes break and then continue with the meeting of the dynamic collision. Thank you.